Okay, well, thank you all for coming back, and I'm actually coming back, I think, again on the 13th of July, please God, for Parshas Shelach. This week is Parshas Shelach Lecha, and as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the Parshas that there were so many things to choose from, so I had to try and narrow it down, because it's the story of the Meraglim, the story of the spies who are appointed, and they go to the land of Israel to look at the land, to say whether it's good, and they come back mainly with a bad report. Only two spies, Yoshua and Kalev, have got nice things to say, and everybody else has got not nice things to say. Then the Israelites are punished to be 40 years to stay in the desert. We learn about the mitzvah of challah, taking a portion of the dough, and idol worship. Then we have the story that we're going to concentrate on today. It's the story of the Mekoshesh, and don't worry, I'll translate that and explain to you what it is, but I'm calling it Mekoshesh because it's very ambiguous, so we have to call it the Mekoshesh. And then the Parsha finishes with tzitzis, the mitzvah to wear fringes on a four-cornered garment. So let's dip straight in. So everyone's got the source sheet. Anyone doesn't have it? Do you have it? Okay, it's source sheet. Okay, this is the story. It's just a few verses long, and here goes. So the story is it's the penultimate part of the parsha. The end of the parsha ends with tzitzis, the Shema, the last paragraph of the Shema. So Bamidbar tes vov pasuk lamed beis, vayihiyu bnei Israel Bamidbar. And the children of Israel were in the desert, or in the wilderness. Vayimtseu ish Mekoshesh eitzim. And they found a man doing something, Mekoshesh eitzim. And we'll talk about what it is in a minute. B'yom HaShabbos. Whatever it was not a good thing. We'll talk about what he did in a minute. Vayakrivu oso hamotzim oso. And the people who found him brought Mekoshesh eitzim, the man who did this thing, Mekoshesh eitzim, el Moshe to Moshe, ve'el Aron to Aron, ve'el kol ha'eda, and to the entire congregation. Vayanichu oso bamishmar, and they put him in custody, they put him in jail, they locked him up. Kilo poresh ma ya'aselo, because they did not know what to do with him. What does that remind you of? When Moshe didn't know what to do, and they sort of kept him in a mishmar. For those people who were here a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about the man who cursed Hashem, the Makalel, the curser, the Ben Ish Yisraeli, and a lot of people compare and contrast these two stories, because also Moshe didn't know what to do, and also he gets put in sort of like in custody until we know what to do with him. But that's not our topic for today. Right, I just want to point something out to you. There's a samach, so if you look in a chumash, there are gaps. So either we have like what we call a new paragraph, so we call it like a return key, a new paragraph. That is represented as a pei, and it's called a patucha, a pasucha. And then they've got the ones which are like in the middle of a text, which actually is the shape of a little samach, because it's almost like a circle, I call it a tab. It's like just moving on 3 spaces, and that's called a stuma, which means a little sort of a closed, enclosed. We have a gap in the text. I especially kept it in there to show you, because they didn't know what to do, and there was like a time period of waiting. What shall we do with this guy who's done whatever Mekoshesh eitzim is, which is a bad thing, on Shabbos? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe, Mos yumas ha'ish, the man shall be put to death. Rogum oso va'anovim, you should pelt him with stones. Kol ha'eda mechutz lamachaneh, the entire congregation should pelt him with stones outside the camp. Vayotziu oso kol ha'eda el mechutz lamachaneh, and the whole community took him outside the camp. Vayirgemu oso, and they stoned him ba'anovim with stones. Vayomos, and he died. Ka'asher tzivah Hashem es Moshe, like Hashem commanded Moshe. Now, there is a concept in Jewish religion about capital punishment, and I have to tell you something. For me, living in 2022, I find capital punishment very hard to deal with, and I don't even want to go there because I find it very disturbing. But there is lots written about what capital punishment is, and there's lots written about like did this happen? Did anyone ever get put to death? They made the conditions of being put to death so harsh. Like, you had to be warned, there had to be 2 witnesses, they had to see you doing it again. So basically, you really, really have to want to go out of your way to really be put to death. And there were 4 types of being put to death. And that was stoning, strangulation, now my mind's gone blank. Sakila, Sarefa, Herek, V'chenek. Strangulation, burning. Now my mind's gone blank, but it will come back to me in a second. One of you can tell me what it is. I don't know, I've just gone back. Okay, it will come. Senior moment. Apologies for that. So, first thing we have to know, look at this story. I want to ask you, who is the person who was the perpetrator?
We don't know.
Do you know his name, his address? His email address, Instagram account? He's called Ish Mekoshesh Eitzim. Eitzim is trees, something to do with trees. We're going to find out what it is. Okay. Do we know what he did wrong? Well, we're going to have to see what Mekoshesh Eitzim, how we can translate that. And then there's some very weird superfluous information because we don't even know his name. We don't even know what he did wrong, but we call him Mekoshesh Eitzim twice. The children of Israel are in the desert. We know they're in the desert. The whole book's called Bamidbar. We know they're in the desert. They're there for 40 years. What's the problem? What does it mean? They found him. And then the people who found him brought him. What is that all about? Okay, it's just the very strangest language. Why did they have to lock him up? What did he do wrong? And why did Moshe not know what to do? The first thing is, let's talk about what he actually did wrong. And there are 4 opinions as to what he did wrong. Because quite frankly, no one can tell what he did wrong. So the rabbis come...
Is this the only time Mekoshesh is used in the Torah?
I don't know, but it's related to kash.
Which is
Straw. Okay?
Or cutting.
Maybe.
Or gathering, yeah, you gather.
Yes, okay.
Gather
Good question. I'll have to look up that for you and I'll tell you because I don't know the answer. Maybe you can tell me the answer.
No, I think
Okay, and the other thing is, 3 times in the story it says, Es el kol ha'eda, kol ha'eda, kol ha'eda. It's like, why are we obsessed with the congregation? It seems like the story is less about the man himself. It's rather about the people in the story. First of all, what was he doing? Because we have no idea what he was doing. But whatever it is, what I find very fascinating is this story is perched in between idolatry, the laws about idolatry, and the next thing is tzitzis. So I think it's Rav Zalman Sorotskin who says that this man broke Shabbos somehow. And idol worship and breaking Shabbos are similar in the way that if you don't believe in God, you will not keep Shabbos holy because that's his day. It says, Osi le'olam, that we are testifying to the fact that God created the world in 6 days, and rested on the 7th day. So the idea of it comes from before idolatry, like people who sort of lose their way and worship the gods of others. And then we have this story about someone who doesn't keep Shabbos. And then at the end, we have the mitzvah of tzitzis. And when we have the tzitzis, the words will be very familiar from the Shema. Ure'isem oso, uzachartem es kol mitzvos. You'll remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. So we see that straight after this story where someone forgets themselves and doesn't keep Shabbos, we're then reminded about the laws of tzitzis where we don't need to because women don't need it, but men have a constant reminder on them. They've got tzitzis to remember Hashem. And we say you should see the tzitzis, and maybe some people say you see the blue scheles, which should remind you of the sky, which remind you of the holy throne where God sits up on high. So what did this man, Mr. Mekoshesh, do? And remember I said his name was Mr. Mekoshesh, because there is an opinion which says his name was Mr. Mekoshesh. Okay, the Chizkuni, source 2 on your sheet. Mar Omer, one person says, Ma'avir dalad amos b'reshus harabim haya. He carried 4 amos, which is a measurement of an arm's length, which is like different people have got a decision about how exactly what that is, in reshus harabim. What's reshus harabim? In the public domain. Interesting, maybe that's why we're told at the beginning, Vayihiyu v'nei Yisrael Bamidbar, the children of Israel were in the Midbar. Is a desert considered to be a Reshus Harabim? Because do lots of people walk around in a desert? Or is it like only, 100 Bedouins walking around the desert. Now that the entire congregation of Israel, 600,000 people, we've got a lot of people going there. Therefore, maybe now the desert, because the Jewish people are in the desert, the Israelites are in the desert, it now becomes classified as Roshos HaRabim, public domain, and you're not allowed to carry it. It's the last malacha of the 39 malachas. It's called Hotza'ah. So that's what Chizkuni says, that's one opinion. So he carried some sticks that were already cut he carried it 4 cubits, okay? Umar Omer, in another opinion, Tolesh Haya. Tolesh means plucking, but not plucking feathers, like pruning, like cutting bits of tree. So it comes under the malacha of kotzer, which is harvesting. Now, the 39 malachas, I'll just do a tiny digression, on Shabbos are all things that were done in the Mishkan, and that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So they would have cut wood for the fire, they would have killed animals. The first 11 are the bread baking process. So that would be anything from planting seeds to harvesting, to watering, to gathering, to winnowing, and all of those. And of course finishing off with baking. So that's part of the process. So the first one is carrying 4 amos, which is hotzah. The next one would be kotzer, and tolesh is one of the subsections. Cutting, any cutting. You're not allowed on Shabbos to cut the grass, you're not allowed to chop the tree, you're not allowed to pluck a flower, none of that on Shabbos. And specifically the ones that are midoraisa, which are forbidden by the Torah, are things that they did in the temple. So something that you would do today that would be something that's not from the Torah, not from the Torah. From the Torah would be something that was done in the temple. So if, for example, kumquats wouldn't have been something they had in the desert, that would be a rabbinic prohibition to cut a kumquat off a tree. You can, if you've got, let's say, grapes, they're already detached from the vine, but you've got a bunch of grapes, you can cut that because it's not attached to the source. Just a side issue about Hilchos Shabbos. The last opinion is ma'amer. He did something called making bundles, heaping up, and we're not allowed to do that also on Shabbos. So, and the Abarbanel says, source 3 on your sheet, Efshar lefaresh Mekoshesh eitzim shehoya chotev v'kores biyodov, that he was chopping something that was already cut. So let's say he had some branches that had been cut off the tree and he was chopping them into smaller pieces. I don't know what he wanted to do, maybe for making a nice Shabbos arrangement with some dried twigs. I don't know exactly what he was doing there. And this is what the Abarbanel says, V'ose eitzim katanim, and he was making small little trees, meha eitzim hagasim, from bigger branches. So perhaps he took a tree trunk, cut it down, and then he was just taking the twigs or something. Hagasim hagadolim, ki Mekoshesh hu miloshan kash. And that's the Abarbanel, who was the famous Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, passed away in 1508, who was also, apart from being a biblical commentator, he was also a Portuguese statesman to the king. So he says it's from the word kash, straw. Very interesting, as a very small side point, is that Pharaoh in Egypt, when the Bnei Israel were there, and Moshe said, can we go in the desert and sacrifice for 3 days in the wilderness? He says, oh, you've obviously got so much time on your hands. I'll tell you what, you're going to have to collect your own straw. And the word is kash. And that, some of the Mefarshim tell us, he said to them, you've got free time? Because on Shabbos, according to the Medrash, the Bnei Israel used to spend Shabbos learning. They had some sort of scrolls and they did learning. And Paro said to them, on your time off, you better be busy collecting straw, which is really interesting because that is desecrating Shabbos, according to the Medrash, collecting straw. Fascinating connection that I read. But it seems to be that whatever this man did was very ambiguous. Why are the rabbis sort of trying to make something up? And I would like to suggest that it's because it doesn't actually matter what he did. Whatever he did was something, it's not relevant. It's more about that he did something, and we're not arguing about what he did. It's unclear. What's important is that something happened here that he did on Shabbos, and what's significant is that he was put in jail and he was dealt with by the whole congregation, and that he was found. Okay, let's look back at the psukim again. The first verse, Lamed Bey, source 1, Vayimtseu ish Mekoshesh eitzim, and they found a man collecting sticks. You could just say, V'haya ish Mekoshesh eitzim. There was a man collecting sticks, or there was a man, right, breaking Shabbos. Chizkuni says, they found him means they were looking for him. Melamed shemono Moshe shomrim olov, that Moshe had appointed guards or watchmen to watch what he was doing. Umotzu oso Mekoshesh, and they found him collecting, which is what I said to you earlier on. You cannot ever put someone to death unless they've been warned and there are witnesses. And then the Chizkuni says, but hold on a minute, we know in the first verse it says, and they found a man collecting sticks or gathering sticks, whatever, I'll use the words interchangeably, carrying sticks for amos. Next pasuk Lamed Gimel, vayakrivu oso hamotzim oso, and I can't even translate it to English. The people who found him, it's like as if it's obsession with finding him. What is that about? So the Chizkuni tells us, source 5, not only did they appoint people over him, we already know someone found the man collecting or gathering or, walking with 4 amos with sticks. What are we going to learn from the fact they brought him, the people who found him? Malamed shehisiru bo v'lo ho'il. They found him again, and they warned him, and they told him, stop, and he said, no. Very strange story. Okay, I'm just going to pause if anybody wants to say anything, or Madeline, I can feel, no? Okay, anybody else say that?
So there's his mental capacity. There's no mention of that. Of course, we would think, well, what about his mental capacity? Did he completely understand? Was he able to discipline himself? What was the reason why he was doing this? Did he need the
Okay,
to make
so that's what we're going to talk today about, what was the reason, and what was his motivation for doing whatever he did. Just want to take a very brief detour and remind you that there are 5 times in the Torah where Moshe doesn't know what to do. Now Moshe probably did know what to do, and we'll talk about that in a second, but there are 5 occasions where Moshe almost has to ask God and say, what should I do? One is with the Makalel, the person who cursed Hashem. One is with the daughters of Selofchod, who come to Moshe when they're about to enter the land and say, what should we do? We'd like a possession, and we don't have a father, and we don't have any brothers, so where's our possession? Another time is with the story of Pinchas, who doesn't know, Moshe didn't know what to do when Pinchas saw Cosby and Zimri. It's a whole story on its own, I'm not going to go too much into it. And Pesach Sheni is another one, which is in Parshas, we just read it, Parshas Shelach Lecha. Just for people who are interested, the Vilna Gaon has made the acronym Menatzpach, which are the 5 final letters, Mem, Nun, Tzadi, Pei, Kaf, the 5 final letters, the acronym Menatzpach, to remind you, Mekoshesh, the no Keves Hashem, the person who blessed, cursed Hashem, Tzadi, Selofchad, Pei, Pesach, and Kaf, Cosby. So if you ever want to have a quick ways to remember the 5 things that Moshe did not know. And that's the Vilna Gaon. So what was Moshe's problem? What did he not know? Okay, so Rashi says, but they didn't know what to do. Let me just look at the words in Hebrew. Kilo porash ma ye'oselo, the end of Pasuk 34, Lamed Daled. But Moshe must have known what to do, because in Shemos chapter 31 we read, oh, by the way, the last form of death was beheading. Just come to me. Right, we read in Shemos Lamed Aleph Pasuk Yud Daled and Tesvav, which is source 7 in your sheet. Ushamartem es haShabbos ki kodosh hi lachem, and you have to keep the Sabbath day holy because it's holy for you. Machalaleho mos yomos. Anyone who desecrates the Shabbos should surely be put to death. So what was Moshe's problem? He knew what the laws were. Someone who desecrates Shabbos was warned they have to be put to death. Because Hashem created the world in 6 days and he rested on the 7th day. Whoever does work on Shabbos, ha'oseh melacha b'yom ha'Shabbos, mos yomos. As far as I'm concerned, that is quite clear. But the Gemara explains what Rashi says, and says, actually, Moshe knew that he deserved to die, and he knew that he was warned, he knew all of that. He didn't know which one of the 4 means of capital punishment he was going to be he was going to be doled out. So let's look at source 8, the Baba Basra Kuf Yud Tes. Source 8 on your sheet. V'yodea hayom Moshe Rabbeinu she ha-Mekoshesh b'misa. Moshe knew that he was destined to be punished by capital punishment. Shene'emar, as it says in our source 7, Machalaleha Mos Yumos. Moshe knew that, the same as we know that. Aval lo haya yodea be'ezo misa hu yomos. He had no idea which one of the 4 forms of capital punishments. V'ra'uya hoisa parashas Mekoshesh shetichtov al yedei Moshe. And it should be that this story, Moshe should have told us the laws of how the person should have been punished. Ella shenichtav Mekoshesh sorry? Shenischayev Mekoshesh v'nichtava al yado, but the person who collected the sticks or cut the sticks, whatever he did, he was guilty, and so the portion is written because of him and about him, lelamedcha, to teach you, and this is like an idea in Chazal, shemegalgalin zechus al yedei zakai, that merit is brought about by one who deserves merit, and liability v'chova al yedei chayav, that something meritorious is brought about by someone who deserves merit, and someone who deserves something bad's brought about, like they can get notoriety, they're going to, because they've done something inappropriate, they are the one who's going to achieve infamy. They're going to become infamous rather than famous. And we have, for example, the classic example in the Torah would be Zelophehad's daughters. Moshe didn't know what was happening. They cared so much about the land, not about a property and the money they would have, but because they loved the land, and therefore the law of women inheriting where there's no male heir came about through the hands of Zelophehad's daughters. It could have come out, or for example, the story of Pesach Sheni came about because those people, they cared so much. They missed Pesach and they were so upset. So they brought around the law was, they had the honor of the law being brought out in their name. And I know this is going to be very strange, but for example, in our times, for example, I don't know what everyone's politics is, and I don't particularly have an opinion about it, but for example, somehow Hashem destined what's going out of my mind? It's terrible today. What's the president? The previous president of the United States? Trump. Trump was the one, in inverted commas, somehow Hashem decided he was going to be the agent of bringing, I can't believe I forgot Trump's name. I kept thinking Biden. And he was the one who brought about the bringing Jerusalem in his leadership. Just think about it, how incredible that is, or who would be there, that the people who were there at the time and brought about the state of Israel, or who was there at the right time, in the right place, that the state was brought around at their time. They deserved it. I'm not saying people who didn't have it are not deserving, but just think about how incredible it is. Who is the person who is there at the right time, at the right place, who gets the honor of saying the law's named after them or something like that? Or, unfortunately, terrible things have happened and people have stood up and they said, I want a law to be brought about, and then the law gets called in that person's name. So Moshe didn't know what to do because he didn't know which type of capital punishment to dole out. And later on we find out the way to kill, the way he deserved to be killed was through stoning. The Sifri, which is source 9 in Bamidbar, tells us about the significance, about the fact that they were in the desert. But why do we have to start the story off saying, Vayiyu b'nei Israel Bamidbar? We know where they are. They're in the desert for 40 years. What are you starting? The Torah doesn't waste words. What is that? And the Sifri, which is a medrash on Bamidbar, tells us, Beganus Yisrael, it's an embarrassing story for Bnei Israel that this story is written. Hakasov medaber, shelo shomru, ela Shabbos Rishona. They only kept one Shabbos. They were given the laws of Shabbos. Just think about it. They left Egypt. 7 weeks later, they get Torah. They're in the desert for 1 week, and they break for the next week. They don't keep Shabbos the second week. V'shelo shomru ela Shabbos Rishona, v'shniya chilalu. Somebody broke Shabbos, the second Shabbos of the wilderness. So even though this story is written in Bamidbar, actually it took place very soon after Matan Torah, and that is what the Chazal tell us because it says this happened in the wilderness. And then he says, you want to know what the story is? They met a man who was Mekoshesh Eitzim. He was harvesting, he was cutting and plucking, and he was cutting from the ground. So we say he's Mekoshesh Eitzim. So the Sifri tells us it's because he was cutting, harvesting from the ground, which is one of the forbidden activities on Shabbos. And this is what's fascinating. Oh, Ish Atzmo Ushamo Mekoshesh. Or he was a man, and his name was Mr. Mekoshesh. Interesting, because they can't understand what he did. Umi Haya, and who is this man? Da da da. Here comes a big expose in the newspaper. Opening yourself up for defamation of character. Rabbi Akiva says it was none other than Selofchad. Now, Selofchad is a man who dies in the wilderness with 5 daughters, and the daughters are named a few times in the Torah, and there's no boy. So who gets the inheritance of his portion? And in fact, it's perhaps not even the inheritance of his portion, but perhaps he was a firstborn, so he was entitled to a double portion. So perhaps that's what they were unsure about, whether or not the daughters would inherit double portion. Where does Rabbi Akiva get the idea from that it's Selofchad? Why does he just pluck up a name from the sky? Ne'emar kan midbar. The verse starts off, Vayiyu b'nei Yisrael Bamidbar. That is completely useless information. The children of Israel are in the desert. We know where you are. Why are you saying it? So he says, V'ne'emar lahalon midbar. You want to see the story about Selofchad, which we're going to look at in source 10 in 1 second. And they also say, we are in the midbar. So he's connecting the 2 stories of the midbar. So the same way that they're saying, here we are, we're doing a geographical location, we're in the midbar. Look at source 10, which is Bamidbar Kav Zayin Pasuk Gimel. When the daughters of Selofchad approach Moshe with their request that Moshe gives them more space in the land, they say, source 10, Ovinu meis Bamidbar, our father died in the desert. Vahu lo hayo b'socha eda. He was not part of the congregation. Hano adim al Hashem ba'adas Korach. He didn't rebel against Hashem with Korach, which you'll be hearing all about next week. Ki bechet'o meis. He died of his own sin. Uvonim lo hayolo. He died of his own sin. We don't know what his sin was. His sin is not expanded. Here we have a story of a midbar, connecting midbar in the story of Selofchad to midbar in the story of this story, which has got a few pasukim. Within such a few words, we have a story, and we don't know anything about the guy, but you're wasting the words and saying Bnei Yisrael in the midbar. And they're saying our father died in the wilderness. The story could have just been Avinu Meis. You could have just said that. You don't need the word Bamidbar. Okay, all happy with the fact it could be Selofchad? Okay.
The decisive word is
Bechet'o, because of his sin.
Because other people died because of the 40 years, other people were dying.
As a sin of the Meraglim. Absolutely.
The sin of the Meraglim. The decisive word that the Benot Selofchad say when they're describing their father is he died because of his own sin. So who do we know in what we've been told who died because of his own sin? Mekoshesh Kashem.
Also, they say he wasn't in Adas Korach, he wasn't in the congregation of Korach, and 3 times in our story we've got Adar. It's like he's not part of the Adar, and he's Ish. You don't have to say Ish. In Hebrew, you don't have to say that. You could just say Mekoshesh. You don't have to say Ish Mekoshesh. He was on his own. He was one man. It wasn't like Anashim Mekosheshim. It wasn't anything like that. Yes.
It says that they kept Shabbos on one occasion.
The first Shabbos.
So, but we're now being told that he committed the sin previously, the Aron, not on Shabbos.
No, because they got the 10 Commandments and Shabbos was commanded, and the Bnei Yisrael were being taught. So the question is also, had all the laws been clarified? So maybe yes, maybe no. But there is an opinion which says the story took place at the beginning of their time in the desert. In fact, so much so they say they should have gone into Israel very soon afterwards. The spies went to Israel, and very soon afterwards this story took place, like within a matter of a week, if they only kept one Shabbos. Think about it. Okay, now we have a defamation suit. And I'm sure that everybody's been keenly following the Johnny Depp Amber Heard. If you say anything bad about anybody else, and I'm sure we know things about classified information, and we know all about GDPR, anyone who's involved in any community organization, gagging orders, injunctions. Now, the Torah doesn't say who this man was. Rabbi Akiva says, do you want to know who it is? Come in, I'll tell you who it is. It's Salafchad. Okay? Now, I think Rabbi Akiva knew the laws of Lashon Hara better than I do. Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera, which is a continuation of source 9, takes great umbrage with Rabbi Akiva. And he criticizes him. Source 11. Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera, Omer, Osid litain es hadin, kol ha'omer salafchod Mekoshesh haya. Boy, are you, Rabbi Akiva, or anyone else who blabbles and says, defames the character of Salafchad, and says that he was the person who desecrated the Shabbos, whatever he did by carrying, plucking, cutting, chopping, you shouldn't blurt it out. Maybe he is or maybe he isn't. He's not saying Rabbi Akiva is right or wrong. He's saying, if you know, the Torah doesn't say, there's like being an injunction, the author of the Torah, Hashem, puts an injunction on Salafchad. What on earth are you, Rabbi Akiva, doing by telling everyone? Hashem doesn't say, what are you blabbling? And he says, Im Misha Omar V'haya ha'olam kisa olav, if the person, the one, Hashem, who spoke V'haya ha'olam and created the world, hid the identity of this person who was Mekoshesh Eitzim, Va'ata magale olav, and you're going to publicize it? How dare you? This is my favorite part. So he says, don't tell me, don't cause Salafchad embarrassment. Then he says, Ella me'ayin haya, where is this person? Where is Salafchad from? Min hama pilim haya. Don't blame, either this is a bit of ambiguous language, either is it Salafchad's from one of the mapilim, or this man was one of the mapilim. But the mapilim, we're not going to go into it today, is a story about people, it's in Bamidbar Perek Yud Daled, where people thought, right, we're going to go to Israel, we're going to go to Israel, we're going to go to Israel, we're going to go, we're going to go, we're going to go. And they said, doesn't matter that Hashem said we would be putting this out 40 years. We are chalutzim, we're going. And they went, and Moshe said, don't go. And they got attacked and they died. Which is why I don't think he means that it's one of the Marpilim, because I think the Marpilim died. So I just...
Was Rabbi Yehuda contemporary Rabbi Akiva? What he would have said is...
I don't know. Next question that I'm going to have to look up.
It is interesting that his comment, you know. She's right, like the Torah didn't choose to reveal the name, but yeah, we do that all the time. The Parshas will try to.
Okay, so I just, for number source 12, anyone who wants to look at that, I just thought there's something, there's something called an anonymized injunction. There's loads of things, people take out injunctions. I actually Googled injunctions, and then you get like, do you want to know who the football star who did X, Y, and Z is? And then it tells you all about it. It's just absolutely hilarious. If you look for the word injunction, you find any juicy gossip you want to find, you can find it. So if the Torah, Hashem puts an injunction and hides the identity of Salafchad, it's not up to Rabbi Akiva to blurt out who it is. Why would Rabbi Akiva, who died al Kiddush Hashem, blabble if it wasn't the right thing to do? It's a good question. Good question. Because Rabbi Akiva had a Masorah, and he's something called a Gezerah Shava. He linked it, and that was his Masorah, and it was different from Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera's, what he knew. And he says, and this is written, it's the Tosfos on the Gemara Baba Basra quotes a medrash, and it's source 13 on your sheet, and I think this is quite fascinating. He's explaining why it is that Rabbi Akiva felt that it was appropriate for him to say it was Salafchad when the Torah itself hides the identity of the fact this person had done something disparaging, breaking Shabbos, the second Shabbos in the wilderness. Do you want to say something?
No.
Okay. Salafchad, Hainu Mekoshesh, Salafchad was the Mekoshesh, the man who collected, gathered, carried sticks. Umase Mekoshesh haya b'tchilas arba'im. Miyad acha maaseh meraklim. It happened straight after the decree of the spies, when the spies went into the land of Israel, and the Israelites were destined to stay in the land of Israel and the desert for 40 years and wander in the desert. You have to think that the mood of the people, they just left Egypt, they thought we're going to Israel, and now they're told 40 years, and the punishment was all the men who were over the age of 20 had to die, and it's just awful. They had to dig their own graves, and that's why perhaps we have Tu B'Av, because they used to dig the graves every year because there were so many men who died. And on Tu B'Av, when they were certain, on Tisha B'Av, a lot of them died every year, the 40th year of the desert, the people lay in their own graves, the men, because none of the women obviously sinned, they lay in their graves because there weren't enough people to bury them. And then that year, they every night, the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, they waited in their graves for their soul to be taken, and they realized that the punishment was over. Just shocking. Anyway, so that's perhaps why one of the reasons why we celebrate Tu B'Av, because it's the 15th of the month, where they were certain it was a full moon. Da'omar Bamidbar, the Medrash tells us, I'm source 13, I'm up to 5 lines down the middle. 4 lines down. Bamidrash, de l'shem shamayim niskavin. The man who desecrated the Sabbath did it l'shem shamayim. He had the best of intentions, and he did it for the sake of Hashem in heaven. Shehoyu omrim Yisrael, because the children of Israel were saying, Kivan she, I made a mistake with the vowels there, sorry. Kivan shenigza alehem shelo likones la'oretz. As soon as the Bnei Israel found out that they were not going straight into the land of Israel, shenigza alehem, and it was decreed against them, they would have to be shelo likones la'oretz mima'aseh maraglim. They thought to themselves, we're not allowed in the land of Israel. We were given all the commandments. That's for when we get to the land of Israel. Lots of the commandments are when you get to the land of Israel. That's why they never kept Korban Pesach, because they thought, oh, we won't do that, because in the land of Israel, we're only going to do it when we're there. They were like, hold on a minute. They thought to themselves, Ein mechuyavin ba mitzvos. We don't have any obligation to keep any of the mitzvahs. Now, whoever this man was, and according to Rabbi Akiva at Salafchaz, he was really upset about that, and he's saying, what can I do to show people that it's really important? Keeping Shabbos is really important. Light bulb moment, I know. If I break Shabbos in front of everyone and I get punished, I will die l'shem shamayim. I will die. I will do something. I'll do an avera lishma, an avera with the right intentions. So it says here, Amad v'chilel Shabbos. He got up and he profaned the Shabbos, kedei sheyehareg, that he would be killed. There is a little issue people talk about, does that mean he intentionally set out? You spoke about mental health. Did he intentionally set out to take his own life, which is a bit of a problem, because that's something you're not allowed to do. But of course today we realize much more that people who do take their own lives do it because they're in a place of emotional and they're not in a good place, and therefore it's not considered to be their own fault. They're ill like another person with another illness. V'yiru acherim, and other people should see, and then and then other people would see, and then he would publicize the fact that that keeping Shabbos was the be-all and end-all. Don't think to yourself, you're not in the land of Israel, don't have to keep Shabbos. He's saying, no, I need to stand up. Someone has to see what happens to me, and that will be the biggest deterrent for everybody else, and everybody else will then keep Shabbos after they see what happens to me. And it even proves it. Rav Zalman Sorotskin, he says, when we say the word ish, if you think about the story in Megillas Esther, Ish Yehudi Haya B'Shushan Habira Ushemo Mordechai. When we say the word Ish, we mean an important man, an upstanding individual, a distinguished man. Look at the Pesukim. Vayimtzeu Ish Mekoshesh Eitzim. The fact he's called Ish, he's a distinguished man. He was a man of distinction, and he did it on purpose to show everybody that you have to keep Shabbos. So he had the good intentions. Yeah, Gabriella.
It says previously that he was warned. This is the second Shabbos.
Yeah.
So when do they warn him? How do they know?
But maybe he did it
He was
At
doing
10
it-
o'clock in the morning, he did it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, on the same day.
Maybe he did it on the same day.
It's very, very, unforgiving. And also the other thing was I was thinking about in paragraph 13, the correlation with today, with, we were told how to behave and not to go to parties and not to socialise. And somebody went to a party, there was all these different events going on, and they're severely punished. So in a sense, it's they were so angry that they were keeping all these rules and someone else wasn't keeping the rules, that again, that might have...
That's really interesting what you said about the contemporary.
Like anger.
We're not allowed to talk about anything that went on in Downing Street, though, because they made the rules and they broke the rules. If they would have parked on a double yellow line, which is against the rules, and then say, "Oh, I only did it to show everyone else what would happen if you park on a double yellow line," or made the parties or something, because that's in fact what they're saying. Shelach Lecha did it. He did it for the right reasons, and therefore Rabbi Akiva could justify himself saying, "I can publicize it because this guy was a good guy. He wasn't a sinner. He was a sinner, but he did it l'shem shamayim." Yeah.
But also the nature of killing him, the fact that they were stoning him, which was effectively a slow death. Perhaps there was an opportunity for him to say, "Look, I'm sorry, please forgive me."
I did
Stop.
it, yeah.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
That maybe that was the reason why...
I don't know. I told you I can't. The whole story of capital punishment. It really bothers me. It really bothers me.
It's instant. No, but the fact that he was being stoned, he could say, "I'm sorry."
I know, but if the whole community pelt you with stones, I don't know what it was. They said outside the camp. Maybe they had some sort of pit. Right, so therefore, that's why it keeps saying the community. His identity, he's almost like an anonymous person, even if it was Shelach Lecha or not, because the story's not about that man. The story's about the community who perhaps were not keeping Shabbos and were not behaving appropriately, and they had to learn the lesson, and that's why it was more about the community than about the individual man himself. Right, I've got to carry on. I've only got 10 minutes. Always I run out of time so quickly. Okay, so. Okay, what was his justification? Source 14. The Mechilta tells us when we say V'shomru b'nei Yisrael es haShabbos la'asos es haShabbos l'dorosom bris olam, we shall keep the Shabbos day to observe Shabbos l'dorosom for generations. For generations, it's an everlasting covenant. This is perhaps the reason why we say that on Shabbos, if someone has to break Shabbos to save a life, Rabbi Natan tells us, Chalal Shabbos achas, kedei shetishmo Shabbatos ach harbeh. If a person has to break Shabbos now, because I have to go to the hospital this Shabbos, I should go to hospital to be saved by the doctors in order that I should have the opportunity in the future to keep many more Shabboses. So he was thinking to himself that Mekoshesh, I'm going to break Shabbos to show everyone the importance of Shabbos, to show everyone how important Shabbos is. So I'm just going to stop there for questions if anyone's got, and then I want to talk about the Torah hiding identities of people in Torah and why identities would be hidden in the Torah. Okay, so right, just very quickly. Not enough time. Okay, so I'll just give you a few examples in the Torah where people's identities were hidden. The first example I'd like to give you is perhaps a story where someone's identity is insignificant. We don't know who it was. It doesn't actually matter who it was, but we see who it was. And that's source 15 on your sheet. This is going back to the story of Joseph, and he's about to go and meet his brothers in Dothan, which triggers the whole brothers putting him into the pit, him going down to Egypt, the whole brothers coming down to Egypt, or else going into Egypt, coming out of Egypt, getting the Torah. So it's the start of the story, okay? Here's source 15. It's in Bereshis Lamed Zayin. Vayim So'ehu Ish. Really interesting because it's about they found him and it's sort of connected to the Mekoshesh. And and a man found Yosef, V'hinei To'eh Basodeh. He was wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, what are you looking for? Who are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for my brothers. That's it. Now, we don't know who this man is. We never know who the man is. Basically, it's insignificant. Although, Chazal tell us it was the angel Gabriel. And how do they get that? Because there's a pasuk which says, V'ho'ish Gabriel in Daniel, if you want to look it up, 9:21 in Daniel. So there we say it could be the angel Gabriel who was just there at the right time. But basically, we don't know who that man was. We don't know anything else about him. Not so relevant to the story, we don't find anything about him. But there is a concept called the conservation of biblical personalities, or conservation of biblical characters. And we have, for example, Avraham, after his Sarah dies, he marries a lady called Keturah. And the rabbis tell us, do you want to know who Keturah is? It was Hagar. because we like to bring people back, okay? So I don't want to talk about that too much, but they say that we try and bring people in and call them and bring them back. We like to conserve biblical characters. Another example of conservation of biblical characters is an unnamed lady, and that is the wife of Noach, who gets called the whole time in the Torah Eshes Noach, right? We don't know the name of the wife of Lot, although the Medrash tells us her name was Irit or Idit. It's differently typed in Hebrew, so it's difficult to know what her name was. We even know there's a Medrash for the wife of Levi, that her name was Osa, and it's a play on words actually pegged on the text. Noach's wife does not have a name, but there is one name of one lady who's mentioned around the time of Noach, and that is a lady called Naamah. And she is known as the sister of Tuval, Yuval, and Tuval Kain. And that's Bereshis Daled, Va'achos, source 17, Va'achos Tuval Kain Naamah. And Naamah was Tuval Kain's sister. So Rashi there on the spot says, do you want to know who Naamah is? It was Noach's wife. And the Gur Aryeh says, why does Rashi say, he quotes the Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah, to tell you, the Gur Aryeh is the Maharal of Prague, who passed away in the early 1600s. And he says, the Torah tells you that her name is Naamah because the name, first of all, Naamah is mentioned. She's the only woman who's mentioned around that time. She must be someone important. And she was worthy in her own right to be saved from the flood. Therefore, she's mentioned. Her name is Naamah. Ma'aseha na'imim. Her deeds were pleasant, and she was righteous and upright in her own right, and she deserved to be saved. So we're going to link Noach's wife to Naamah because she deserved to be saved. And we've only got two more stories. We'll have to go very, very quickly through the next two stories. And that is the story in Shemos. Now, after Yaakov dies, Bnei Israel are down in Egypt. They came down to Yosef and they're living in Egypt. And then we have the tribes all die. And then we have Paro coming along saying, I don't really like this nation. They're getting too big. Let's kill all the boys. And then we have chapter 2, Shemos chapter 2, we have this story. Now, the most incredible part of this story, while I'm talking about anonymity in the Torah, is that we know the names of every single character, but yet the story does not mention anybody's names. And I'm just going to read it very quickly in English so that you can just hear it, but in your own time read it in Hebrew. It's literally, the book of Shemos is called Shemos, names, and then we have this whole story where no one's name is mentioned in the first 10 verses except Moshe when we get to him in a second. A man from the house of Levi, without a name, we know it's Amram, went and took a woman from the house of Levi. We know it's Yocheved. The woman conceived and bore a son without a name. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she got a wicker basket for him and she covered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it, who's got no name, and placed it amongst the reeds by the banks of the Nile. His sister, who we know is Miriam, but she's got no name, stationed herself at a distance to learn what was before him. The daughter of Pharaoh, who's got no name, who incidentally in Divrei Hayomim, we're told her name is Basya, the daughter of God, came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens, no name, walked along the Nile. She, we don't know, saw her name, saw the basket amongst the reeds, and she sent her servant, no name, to fetch it. When she, no name, opened it, she, no name, saw that it was a child, no name, a boy crying. She, no name, took pity on it and said, this must be a Hebrew child. Then his sister, no name, said to Pharaoh's daughter, no name, shall I find you a Hebrew nurse to breastfeed the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter, no name, said yes. So the girl, no name, went and called the child's mother, again no name, and we know her name. Pharaoh's daughter, no name, said to her, take this child, no name, and nurse it for me, and I will pay you your wages. So the nameless woman took the nameless child and nursed it. When the nameless child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter and made him her son. She named him Moshe, explaining, I drew him out of the water. Why are no names mentioned? Because we know the names of the people, because in the next verse, the next few verses, we'll know all the names of the people. Suggestions. Why have we got no names? Why are names missed out?
Well, exactly, because when we've known names before, they've always been repeated, all the way through. So why now?
But do you not think this 10 verses is literally like, whatever I do, I'm not going to tell you anyone's name. It's like we're playing a game. It's like sausage and mash. You can't say the words. Okay? It's completely ridiculous. When you hear the story and I say the word no name, I just can't, it's like, I'm even like bored of myself hearing it. Okay? There is an idea that the story is anonymous because the story, it doesn't matter about everything else before it. Obviously, every word's important and everything has meaning. But the story has to cast a laser beam on the baby called Moshe, who incidentally was given many names by his parents, possibly 10 according to Medrash, and there are different versions of what his names were. His name might have been Tov, his name Avigdor, Yedidia, lots of names Moshe's name was. But the story's not about anybody's names. It's not even about the protagonist. It's almost like a film where we're going to shine a spotlight for the harbinger of the Geula, the person who's going to bring about the redemption. And the whole story culminates in Moshe's birth. We don't want to be distracted by names. But Nechama Leibovitz suggests something, and I find this so fascinating. In the verse just before this, the last verse of chapter 1, is source 21 on your sheet. Vayetzav paro lekol amo lemor, kol haben hayilud hayaora tashlichuhu. Every baby boy who's born is going to be thrown into the river. And Nechama Leibovitz, who was uniquely placed because she came after the Shoah, and people often think about Shoah when we talk about Mitzrayim, when we talk about Sedernight, and we think about the persecution and how the people could lose their identity. And I'm not saying there's a direct link, but I understand why people link those two stories, and perhaps for us to understand a bit more about what the people might have gone through to be pulled out of their houses, etc., etc. It makes it more real for us. And Nechama Leibovitz, who lived after the Second World War, she said, this story is nameless because it's a universal story. It's a story about everyone. It's a story for any time, any place, about time and time again where the Jews were persecuted and were given decrees and it was dangerous to have children. Yet, the nameless man from the house of Levi got up, even though there was a decree that baby boys would be killed, and said, I will still carry on. I will still have children. I want the world to carry on. And even in the camps and in the ghettos, babies were born. Can you imagine that? How people had the strength of courage. Perhaps from the strength of courage that Moshe's own parents had. And even there's a medrash which says they separated because they didn't want to have a child. Another whole story in itself. But to my mind, that is incredible, so that if a name is not mentioned, it gives some sort of universality. So another thing is anonymity can be unanimity. So for example, the Ma'apilim, which we spoke about before, the people who went up, they were unanimous in what they decided to do and they all did it together. So we don't mention anyone's names because they all decided together. There's loads of stories in Tanakh where people are not named. The people who collected the Mon on Shabbos, which is also about collecting and Shabbos. Also very interesting, which the Medrash tells us is most likely to be Dosan and Aviram. But sometimes there's no value in revealing someone's identity. So for example, the guy who was the Mekoshesh H'sim, if he was a person who collected wood on Shabbos, we shouldn't say who it was. We don't have to say somebody's disparaging. I want to finish off with one story, which is from Shavuos, the story of the Book of Ruth. And in the Book of Ruth, there's a lot of name play in the Book of Ruth. All the names of the people, Elimelech, Eli Tovo Malchus, to me the kingship will come. And I'd like to talk about one character who is not named, and his name is Ploni Almoni. He gets called what we call colloquially John Doe. He gets called Mr. Anonymous, and I love the English translation. In one of the Chumashim, in one of the Megillas I looked at, he's called Mr. So-and-so. Because in English, you say, oh, he's a right so-and-so. It's got negative connotations. Look what happens. He was supposed to marry Ruth. Ruth goes to Boaz, and Boaz says, you can't marry me. There's someone who's closer relative. And Boaz says, let's go and speak to this man. Source 22. Boaz Allah Hashav vayeshev sham v'hinei hagoel over. And he was sitting, and behold, the Redeemer, who Boaz had previously mentioned, passed by. And he said, Shava po Ploni Almoni. And he said, hi, Ploni Almoni, come over here. Did he call him Ploni Almoni? I'd like to suggest he didn't call him Ploni Almoni. The Medrash tells us it was either Boaz's uncle or his cousin called Tov. And I'm not sure I got that right, but certainly it was definitely a brother of Elimelech. And he was a closer redeemer than Boaz. Boaz's father was Salmon or Salma. And he calls him Ploni Almoni. He doesn't even get the respect of being called a name. And this is deliberately punitive anonymity. He was not willing to stand up to what he was supposed to do and lohokim shem hames, to be a partner with Ruth in the Levirate marriage, to bring back the name of Ruth's dead husband and have a child with her. Therefore, he loses the right to let his name be mentioned. So for that, we've gone from the Mekoshesh, who is unnamed, to Rabbi Akiva, who says it's Selofchad. For Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda ben Matera saying, I've got a defamation case against you. To Rabbi Akiva saying, but he did the right thing. He did it l'shem shamayim. He did it avera lishma. He did it for the right reasons. He wanted to show people the importance of keeping Shabbos in the desert. Don't ignore it. To reasons why people would be anonymous in the Torah. Sometimes they're insignificant characters, perhaps. Sometimes we're going to find out later. Sometimes, like what I suggested, Nachama Leibovitz says, that it's a universal story. Sometimes it's unanimity in the anonymity. And sometimes it's punitive. Someone doesn't deserve to have their name mentioned. I hope you all have a fantastic week. Enjoy the sunshine whilst we got it.